Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Richard, for the very warm introduction and for inviting me to speak here. Anybody who knows me knows that Clark is one of my favorite places on earth, so it's an especial honor and pleasure to be standing here before you. It's also a big sort of move up the hierarchy for me. I've spoken here before, but previously only in the cafe, so I finally busted out of the cafe. It means a great deal to me. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Our familiarity with the man on the screen at left, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, the stunted, short-lived dipsomaniac aristocrat and wildly successful artist who hung out with entertainers and whores in the leisure mills and dives of Bohemian Paris in the late 1800s, and our fluent knowledge of his ubiquitous, transformative posters, like the 1892 example at right, have hampered our ability to understand and appreciate his art. Just as Lautrec's work interfaced with a culture of celebrity in his own day, he's a present-day celebrity himself. Witness this well-known 60s Peter Max book cover. For the record, only quickly, to drive home my point about Lautrec's renown and instant recognizability, he has, I think, a secure berth on any list of the 10 best-known artists in the world. Now, that's my own list on the screen, and I've already spent a sleepless night thinking of how it should be changed. But, you know, it's a first draft, and I, of course, I think, will welcome your corrections and emendations. But I think my claim will hold up, namely that Lautrec is one of the only two hands full of visual artists known to all present-day art mavens in possession of as little as only 4 to 5 ounces of cultural capital. I'm not going to read that list because something that I can't stand is when somebody reads to me what's on their PowerPoint that I can read with my own eyes. We may need to expand the list to a baker's dozen by adding 3 big wheels of the present moment. You see those names up there, bottom right. Indeed, I will encourage you today to see Toulouse-Lautrec as the Takashi Murakami of the Belle Epoque. Takashi Murakami is the 46-year-old Japanese artist known today for his anime and manga-inspired paintings and sculptures. What I've put together up there in a sort of collage is, again, the emblem of Lautrec's celebrity, the Peter Max image, lower left, next to one of Murakami's over-the-top, expensive, collaborative handbag productions with Louis Vuitton. That's a Murakami Vuitton. Maybe some of you, everybody's so up-to-date in Williamstown, there might be some of them under those seats out there in the auditorium. That one, that's about $43,000, the one that you're looking at there. And up at top, one of Lautrec's poster, in this case, for a pot boiler, a sort of scurrilous pot boiler of a book, in English the title Queen of Joy, up against Murakami's sort of signature, indeed breakthrough, fiberglass giantess there, the Hirpon of 1997. I think you get the picture of what kind of an image that is. What I see, what I'm proposing, are salient similarities between the production and, in fact, strategies of these two artists. I see similarities then both in the registers of their art imagery and their operations within the business of art. Putting Lautrec's poster next to Murakami's sculpture, we see that they're both crafters par excellence of the figuration of eroticized and debased women. And Murakami's Louis Vuitton bags resonate with Lautrec's posters advertising, oh yeah, you got to turn those things off. Advertising cabarets and dicey books. I'll return to this analogy in due course. Back to the pair with which I began. The broad spectrum foundation of my talk today is the art historical corollary of the shibboleth, familiarity breeds contempt. Or rather, we know the ever-present Toulouse-Lautrec so well, we may not think as highly of or as critically about what he accomplished as we might, indeed should. Moreover, the instant recognizability of the artist, his ever-present work, and his primary milieu, Montmartre, and its clubs, familiar right from a more or less constant parade of popular cultural representations, like these two movie posters, has greased the wheels of the cliché mill, persuading us that a, if not the, principal value of Lautrec's, albeit highly aesthetically inventive work, is its documentary acumen, its usually compassionate truth-telling about social experience in the brashest corridors of the entertainment fast lanes of 18th arrondissement Paris in those late century decades when the city itself was called the Café of Europe. Part and parcel, are you okay with my not reading what's on the screen? Okay, all right. Part and parcel of this pattern of belief is the elision that it engineers between the artist's life and his artwork. The autumn 2005 issue of the online journal Tate, etc., for example, included this exemplary tidbit about the artist as drinker. Quote, "The disabled aristocrat famously carried a hollowed walking stick which contained a draught of absinthe and was occasionally accompanied by a pet cormorant that he had trained to drink it. He liked to experiment by adding ingredients such as, bitters, champagne, cognac, and so forth. His lifestyle," I'm still quoting, "inevitably influenced his work. The symbolist painter Gustave Moreau commented that Lautrec's paintings are entirely painted in absinthe," end quote. Well, what an intoxicating non sequitur that is. An utterly alluring but totally unverifiable, indeed nonsensical, proposition. As my lecture title declares, part of his greatness is his invention of what he set down in his art. I hope that these extended introductory remarks have clarified the tasks that face me in what follows. Number one, I'll need to take pains to consider his artworks as acts of invention and imagination rather than descriptions, compassionate, unsentimental, or otherwise. And two, I will want to work particularly hard to make Lautrec's art unfamiliar and surprising again. Now, I think that his dog pictures make that easy. They are certain to surprise and beguile you. Who doesn't like a perky dog picture? And I thought it was interesting to observe that Lautrec, our architect of wickedness, frequently represented these rather charming dogs in different media all the way across his career. But something that indeed I want to use these dogs to demonstrate straight away is that there is enormous range even within the Paris-themed work that he produced as well. For example, the competition for the history of Napoleon advertising poster came as a bit of a surprise. One does not expect to see Toulouse-Lautrec engaging in a figuration, a rather sober figuration, of Napoleon, the first Napoleon, with his entourage, complete with Mameluke there on horseback. Likewise, the lithograph that you see on the right seems to me to be one of the most enduring and really extraordinary projections of the diabolical modernity of the early horseless carriage. Another set of works that reminds us of his extraordinary inventiveness, but also, again, his thematic and medium range, is the 60 or so color lithographs done on the evanescent topic of the dancing American Loie Fuller under the lights at the Folies Bergère. You'll see a couple of them upstairs in the gallery, and what's so amazing about them is that if we were actually able to queue up all 60 plus examples, every single one of them is different because they were variously dusted with metallic paint at the point of completion. So my point that I'm making here, still in the sort of register of setup, is pretty straightforward, right? Although nightclub posters are his signature works in the popular imagination, his oeuvre, that's a pretentious word that art historians like to use. Why use an English word when a French word could be substituted? It's a kind of a belief of ours. So oeuvre means output, his work. But you want to hear the French word again, don't you? His oeuvre was extremely diverse and also, by the way, enormous. The 1971 Catalogue Raisonné, the catalog of his complete works, listed more than 6,000 works. This is an artist who didn't even live to see his 37th birthday. It was a number that included 737 canvases, 275 watercolors, 369 prints and posters, and more than 4,500 drawings. Okay. So Toulouse-Lautrec's career was short but meteoric. Born in 1864 in Albi in the south, he moved to Paris in 1882, set up lodgings in a studio in Montmartre in 1884, studied with Léon Bonnat and then Fernand Cormont. You see, there's the studio on the group of all-male students there, as did his pals Louis Anquetin, Vincent van Gogh, and Émile Bernard. They're all visible in this photo. Here's well, let's try something else that's lying here and see what it will do. Oh, it's teeny. Oh, it's so subtle. This is New England. See how teeny this is? I come from the land of, Rod Blagojevich. We tend to be a bit more sort of large in our gesture making. Anyway, here is the man of the hour here, and in fact, there's Van Gogh over there to the right. Lautrec exhibited in his first group show of many in Paris in 1886, this very year, and had his first one-man show there in 1895. He achieved popularity and acclaim both with the artistic avant-garde and a mass popular audience. He impressed art critics and succeeded commercially. His work coincided with the glory years of the Belle Époque, and as the exhibition upstairs and Richard Rand also just reminded us, indeed has helped to freeze the image of Paris worldwide in the mold of his Belle Époque. And just to maintain your orientation chronologically, It was in 1901 that he passed away, just prior to his 37th birthday. So let's begin in earnest in this key year of 1886, before his fame and notoriety, and track the forging of the bellwether link between his artwork and the commercial clubs comprising the Montmartre cabaret scene. In other words, the inchoate beginnings of Lautrec's entry into the sphere of business art, where he put his art at the service of commerce and broke down many barriers between the orbits of art and mass culture. An absolutely key career milestone fell in 1886 when his artwork, as well as his life, was coming to be centered on the dives of Montmartre. That year, his work was placed on permanent exhibition in one of his habitual hangouts, a Montmartre cabaret known as Le Milieu. These two paintings that you see up here on the screen, sorry for the quality of the picture at left. It's a long story, but it's very hard to get reproductions of that, but we have to look at it anyway. These two paintings were part of a series of canvases of single women that hung in that club. By the way, mirliton is a nonsense word meaning a kind of something between a toy whistle and doggerel verse. The line of paintings represented disreputable women, and hanging on the walls of a very self-consciously outrageous cabaret, they were intended to parody family portraits displayed in bourgeois drawing rooms. The cafe was owned by songwriter Aristide Bruant, portrayed here by Lautrec, who made his name singing his mournful argot songs about pimps, muggers, prostitutes, vagabonds, and petty criminals of the Parisian underclass of Montmartre and an area called La Zone, the urban wasteland created around the periphery of Paris during earlier years, the years of the Second Empire. Many of the songs, Bruant's songs, were named after the sectors of this belt of shacks and empty lots. Bruant began at the Chat Noir cabaret, the Black Cat, which opened in 1881. And when the Chat Noir moved to larger premises in 1885, Bruant took on its premises at 84 Boulevard Rochechouart, incongruously benefiting from a growing bourgeois public's appreciation of his vulgar material and abusive staging of it. I'm just showing you this very simple map of Montmartre. Here's this unbelievably subtle red dot again, making its way down the two key boulevards. The Boulevard de Clichy and the Boulevard Rochechouart are the two key boulevards of this entertainment district, then as now. Bruant made sure that the atmosphere of the Milieu was resolutely coarse, disgusting, and as recognizably working class as possible. Only rough benches and the greasiest tables were used for furniture. This, and you'll like this detail that's about to come forward. Outside the cabaret hung a sign that read, "The Mirliton, rendezvous for those seeking to be abused." It apparently really drew in the crowds, right? Inside, the clients were taunted mercilessly. Montmartre had only been incorporated into Paris proper in 1860, not so long before this date. And during the 80s, because I work on the 19th century, I have this tendency to just abbreviate dates, assuming that everybody lives in the 19th century with me. So when I do that, I mean the 19th century. But I won't, I'll be careful not to do that. During the 1880s, this hill north of the city was still partly rural, but undergoing rapid transformation into the headquarters of brash, commercialized recreation it would become by the turn of the century. And there were indeed, it's worth noting, two Montmartre, a proletarian inner city, and the Montmartre that was laid on for a bourgeois audience on the boulevards. The Montmartre that our artist, Lautrec, represented was mostly, indeed was, I should say, exclusively the latter, a money-making system. This takes us back to Bruant and to the artist. The Lautrec of popular belief is a full participant in the decadent pleasures of the 18th arrondissement, a fully disguised aristocrat passing as a bohemian reprobate. But listen to his own telling expression of the tensions he apparently experienced there. They appear in a late 1886 letter to his grandmother, who was something of a confidant for him. Quote, "I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I'm doing, but it's so special, so, in quotes, outside the law. Papa would, of course, call me an outsider. I had to make an effort, since you know as well as I do, against my will, I'm living a bohemian life, and I can't get used to this atmosphere. The fact that I feel hemmed in by a number of sentimental considerations that I absolutely have to forget if I want to achieve anything makes me all the more ill at ease on the hill of Montmartre," end quote. Tensions notwithstanding, like well-born transgressive artists before him, I'm thinking of Edouard Manet's love of slang, Lautrec dove into the use of the alien culture's argot. He was fascinated by Montmartre's characteristic vernacular, which served almost as a code, permitting people from the neighborhood to identify each other. Right from the first, he started larding his conversation with local expressions, but his speech combined Southern accented aristocratic French with gutter slang, and that combination was conveyed in his particular way of speaking, which was partly a style and partly a consequence of larger, shall we call them, biological, physical problems. Namely, he was reported to constantly lisp and drool as he spoke. So we have lisped, drooled gutter slang combined with the most refined but hard to understand because so accented aristocratic French. So masquerade and imitation piled on to physical infirmity and marks of his birthright were at the heart of his project. While the subjects of his artworks were increasingly the denizens of the electricity-lit night world of Montmartre, the models for the scenes were usually his friends. The wonderful picture on the right belongs to the Clark. It's is it reversed? No. Yes, it's reversed. Well, that's a way for me to show respect for the institution that invited me. How embarrassing. Well, it's reversed. At least I noticed, right? So please, the picture on the right should be the other way around. The picture on the left is an exemplification of this sort of masquerade phenomenon that I'm trying to sketch out. This picture, as you can see, has many names. It's just known for short, usually as the Hangover. The model was, in fact, his pal, fellow artist Suzanne Valadon. According to Lautrec's biographer, Julia Fry, I'm quoting here, he seemed particularly to like the paradox of having perfectly respectable friends play the roles of prostitutes, pimps, and alcoholics. Are those three categories mutually exclusive? I mean, I'm sorry I said that. Prostitutes, pimps, and alcoholics so convincingly that if it were not for photographs showing the close likeness of his works to his friends in the same poses, the viewer would never suspect that the works were not drawn as a slice of life. End quote. Could an observation demonstrate more vividly the degree to which Lautrec invented a fin de siècle, the one that continues to be our own? Gail Murray explains that Bruant's songs had particular importance in establishing a thematic territory for the young artist. His tilt toward popular proletarian themes beginning in 85-86 owed largely to Bruant. I should say before these two pictures leave the screen, they're coming back, that they were also installed in this lineup at the Vuitton. Now here's an even larger image that's extremely bad of this 86 picture. Bruant's song entitled At Grinnell, à Grinnell, originally published in Le Milieu, the name of his club, which was also the name of a little publication, a 4-page paper, published irregularly all the way from 85 to 94. In the issue of 15 May 1886, this song appeared, and it was the basis of the painting from the Hazen collection that you see on the screen. The song narrates a melancholy girl's nostalgic remembrance of her days as a young prostitute consorting with the soldiers in the Grinnell quarter of Paris, where the École Militaire, the military school, is located. Here it comes. When I see 17-year-old girls, it makes me think that long, long ago, I too was a virgin at Grinnell. I've known lancers, dragoons, and cuirassiers. They mounted me and kept me in hand at Grinnell. Infantrymen, officers, legionnaires, mounted to the assault of my breast, they took me as a citadel at Grinnell. Me, I took them all as lovers, I commanded all the regiments. They called me Mademoiselle le Colonel at Grinnell. But this brought me nothing but honor, for if love makes happiness, it doesn't make one a fortune at Grinnell. I'm smiling because a lot of people know I used to work on prostitution, but I've retired from prostitution now, and it always seems uncomfortable for me when I'm back in this material. You'll understand. Okay, that song, Bruant's song, merges social concern with a romantic fascination with the dregs of society, an extremely familiar 19th century combination. I'm following Lautrec scholar Gail Murray's analysis here. On the one hand, those lyrics express compassion for and moral outrage over the plight of the poor, but on the other, they characterize the poor by a provocative, animalistic brutality, coarseness, and lack of inhibition. A painting cannot, of course, embody the multivalent textuality of these conflicting ideas, and Lautrec's canvas is markedly mute and somber by comparison, utterly lacking the bawdy stories of Bruant's poem, nor no soldiers are present to get a narrative of sex off the ground. Only a solitary woman who muses dejectively over the glass, presumably of absinthe, on the table in front of her. On the one hand, in my argument today, what matters most is that the canvas and its sisters were thrust into a specific wicked entertainment milieu, functioning as part of its scenery and commercial atmosphere. In positioning them in that space, Lautrec advanced his own aesthetic of the debased and nestled closer to commerce. But on the other hand, the painting shows the rootedness of his art, in a vanguard Parisian iconographic genealogy, insofar as the subject of a woman drinking, especially drinking alone, appears frequently in Lautrec's work of the second half of the 1880s. It hooks up with works that had been crafted by his predecessors. Parisian artists focused upon modern life before and after Lautrec used absinthe drinkers in particular to evoke and emblematize the social margins of urban life. The use of this drink, you see an exceptionally large, beautifully glowing goblet in front of the woman in Degas' picture at left. The use of this drink was understood to be daring, alternative, transgressive, bohemian, and addictive, even deadly. The use of absinthe became closely linked to all kinds of, just about the whole realm of self-destructive bohemian practices. Witness Lautrec's firm placement of his friend and fellow vanguardist, Vincent van Gogh, within the absinthe orbit in that portrait of him over there on the right. Lautrec relied upon this code, the stigma of impropriety that adhered to virtually any cafe woman drinking on her own, in his effort to securely fix, right, the social and moral condition of his solitary women that he installed in the club in Paris. By the 1890s, Absinthe had outgrown its cult status and was drunk by millions. Its coding in the visual arts also underwent a change. I'm showing you a couple of, as you can see, works from just the beginning of the 20th century here. It became, on the one hand, an absolute fixture in images of besotted respectability, while on the other hand, as here, it functioned as an etiolated and rather cliched emblem of female destitution. Back to the Hangover from 1888. But Lautrec's pictures of this ilk are not merely about drink, despair, intoxication, and all the rest. This picture leads us naturally, I would say urgently, into a discussion of its form, especially its facture, i.e. its surface, and overall materiality. This picture of a proletarian woman in a white shirt about to take a restorative coup de rouge, I mean a drink of red wine, you know why, to quell that pesky hangover, is rendered in loose skeins of oil and black crayon or chalk on canvas. To be precise, the picture is composed of loosely hatched strokes of transparent paint diluted with turpentine, thinly brushed over an underdrawing in that black crayon or chalk. But calling the black drawing an underdrawing is a bit of a misnomer, since it's fully visible and is in fact an integral part of the overall composition. This picture's properties also instance Lautrec's signature avoidance of the shiny and the glossy. As early as 1880, he began acting upon his hatred for varnished painting or any surface that was falsely sealed and glossy. A conventionally pleasing veneer was, of course, multiply meretricious, whether it characterized a picture or a person. From that date forward, he created exclusively matte-surfaced work. In 1888 and 1889, Lautrec added Belgian and Parisian avant-garde exhibition societies to the sites where he displayed his work, thereby shifting the focus of his career to more accepted, if vanguard, venues. At the 5th Salon des Indépendants, an independent exhibition that was held for its 5th time, which was the first major group exhibition that he participated in Paris, these two works were paired on purpose. He put them in side by side. The contrast between them showcases the artist's canny understanding and control of the wellsprings of his artistic inventions. Quoting Reinhold Heller here, conceptually, despite their apparent difference of genre, the two function to contrast bourgeois with lower class evening entertainments, the respected with the déclassé, the fashionable with the vulgar, formality with spontaneity, disguise, and artifice with simplicity and naturalness. Honing in on the large oil on canvas, this was a bit of a breakthrough picture. Still working with proletarian dance hall material, its complex composition and handling index a new aesthetic maturity. Lautrec goes out of his way, both compositionally and at the level of surface, to convey the debased, you might say to invent, and convey the debased nature of his motif, to associate squalor and grime with such a Parisian locale. 3 prostitutes and their Alphonse, which is a silly, well, it means, it's one of the French have a very elaborate set of slang words for pimp. It's quite impressive, and Alphonse is one of them. 3 prostitutes and their Alphonse there, positioned in a carefully choreographed quartet of utterly isolated individuals. If you spend some time looking at this composition, you can see the way it's just like worked out like a Swiss watch. It's so deliberate, the way they're arranged to be disengaged from one another. That quartet declares the desolation, right, of the club's inhabitants, and the dulled colors, streaky handling, and dripped pigment across the bottom of the canvas mark the foreground as an altogether dingy place, both physically and socially. Indeed, when you go up into the gallery and look at that wonderful painting that I showed backwards, you'll see that same kind of drippy, thin pigment is also present. See the way this drips at the bottom here. It doesn't drip now. It shows the evidence of drips. You have to be careful. Okay, quoting Reinhold Heller again, who's really the best, I think, on what he's written on the materiality of Lautrec's work. Quote, "Oil paint's celebrated noble brilliance and sensual viscosity are denied here and fundamentally proletarianized. Made analogous to the dance hall's lower class patrons, while the seeming haste of the brushstrokes offers a quality of impermanence. The painting is, therefore, less a celebration of its art than a fundamental antithesis to the art of painting, vociferously an anti-painting, a virtual bomb in the social order of art's history, its paint dripping from the bottom edge, threatening simply to dissolve and disappear to leave only a soiled canvas behind," end quote. And one should also note this extraordinary, absolutely elegant pileup of small plates in the foreground. It certainly is a virtuosic grace note, that stack of plates, in fact, showing off a certain kind of, I would call it sort of technical and aesthetic virtuosity that sort of sits as a note apart from this laying on the proletarian valences with a trowel elsewhere on the canvas. On the left, certainly one of Lautrec's best-known image, indeed his very first poster. It was set in a different social milieu than what I've described up to this point, namely the Moulin Rouge, the first Montmartre dance hall built specifically to appeal to middle-class and society Paris. Its establishment was explicitly intended to siphon off the clientele the older dance halls had recently built up, particularly the middle and upper-class visitors who now frequented the Hill's certain entertainment establishments, including, look over there at the right, including that Englishman gingerly lampooned in the 1892 lithograph. You can verify that up in the galleries. Quoting Heller again, and for the last time, "The Moulin Rouge offered Parisians and a growing number of foreign tourists, led there by guidebooks, by new guidebooks on Montmartre and its nightlife, a retreat from the everyday into a Disney-esque hyper-reality whose supreme revelation was a fictionalized demi-monde embodied in the naturalist quadrille, the quadrille naturaliste, the most remarkable dance that was performed there. La Goulou is in the middle of one on the left. And its lower-class performers in the excited choreographed display of their sexual allure." In 1889, for the grand opening of the Moulin Rouge, the proprietor hung the work that you see on the screen here, along with another of Lautrec's pictures, another Chicago picture, the Cirque Fernando of 1888. They were hung either in the entrance hall or on the wall over the bar in the club. So Lautrec was already on display and his work associated with this club. Now, I want to go back and talk about the generation of this first poster. And when I put that painting right and the poster side by side, you immediately see the close linkage between them. You can see the way in which, right, the key pair, La Goulou and this fellow whose name I'll tell you momentarily, in fact, are based upon this instance of dance instruction in the middle of the painting. Okay. He was known as Valentin le Désossé, which means the boneless Valentine the boneless one. Le Désossé. So you could say that to friends who seem rather lacking in good posture or something someday, that they are not déclassés, but désossés. I mean, maybe it's a word that we should put into circulation. Anyway, he is a key presence in both that canvas and the poster. In the painting, he is shown auditioning a dancer in the middle ground. In the poster, his monochromatic, here he is, it's been moved forward, this extraordinary figure. His monochromatic and caricatured profile and eccentric hand gestures remove him fully from the space of pedagogy and convert him into something like an interlocutor or a presiding dance hall deity reminiscent of, but at the same time, nastier and more vernacular than Paul Signac's extraordinary Félix Fénéon, whom you see here, in this portrait with the exceptionally complex title, who is represented as a full-out aesthetic wizard officiating in a realm of pure form in a work that's roughly contemporaneous with Lautrec's poster. All right, back to the two key things. Now, in both of these closely linked artworks by Lautrec, the bourgeois character of the clientele is underscored. Look at those hats, which showcases Lautrec's adjustment of his vision and his aesthetic language to the upmarket character of his newly adopted environment. In the painting, the contrast between two modes of handling, the caricatural and hence linear on one hand, and the impressionistically sketchy and more naturalistic on the other hand, is certainly striking. Here we can witness, I think, the complexity of Lautrec's language and technique that instance a negotiation of a host of factors, aesthetic, commercial, and social. Seen in the idiosyncratic combination here of bold formal experiment and naturalistic description, the unusual extent to which saturated chroma shares a canvas with dull colors, and the surprise coexistence of opaque pigment and translucent washes, we might want to argue that Lautrec invented a composite kind of art whose newness, roughness, and inconsistencies worked especially well as an image for such a place. I'm not done with this poster. We're focusing in on it even more now. Of course, Lautrec wasn't the first to make a poster for this particular club. Jules Chéret had produced some previously. But Lautrec's extraordinary stylizations differ pretty starkly from the busyness, nay, clutter of Chéret's design, as well as its somewhat grimacing, conventionally saucy girls. They sort of get on your nerves pretty quickly, I think. When Lautrec joined Chéret's sphere of operations by designing his own huge, I hope you noticed when I had it up before that it's more than 6 feet tall, by designing his huge public 4-stone lithographed poster for the club, the act fused his art ever more tightly with the dance hall as a commercial enterprise. He was not only continuing to bring advanced art into the orbit of mass culture, he was literally crafting an advertisement for a business. The latest scholarship observes that Lautrec's first poster was likely the outcome of winning a competition, to which, it turns out, Pierre Bonnard, the author of that extraordinary pastel over there on the right, also submitted an idea for a poster. In that surviving pastel and charcoal drawing, it's instructive, isn't it, to observe Bonnard's compared to Lautrec, not to mention Chéret, but compared to Lautrec, Bonnard's comparatively eccentric aestheticism In his composition, only one of the dancer's legs is shown from the knee down. The rest of her body remains inscrutable, and she shares the image with only two teeny tiny and rather remote onlookers. Lautrec lays greater emphasis, doesn't he, upon the spectacular and magnetic nature of La Goulou's dance by surrounding her with silhouetted bourgeois admirers and making her so central and legible and bright. So the preliminary drawing on the right, note those dimensions. It's almost as colossal in size as the poster itself. This large preliminary drawing must have served as a kind of laboratory in which Lautrec initiated the startling procedures of radical simplification and synthesis that characterize the forms in the bellwether first poster. Looking at them side by side enabled me to identify for the first time the objective referent of those famous yellow blobs. Those are, come on, those are the most famous saturated yellow blobs in the entire history of art. And it turns out that that flat yellow shape, made of three linked blobs, is actually a condensation, look over at the drawing, of three spherical globes of a low-hanging chandelier. Whether gas or electric cannot be said with confidence at this time. So I was really struck, forcefully indeed, by the link that thus suggests itself between Lautrec's indelible image of Belle Époque nightlife and the cognate work of his predecessor, Edgar Degas, in a print medium. This little teeny wonderful etching is upstairs in the gallery. It belongs to the Clark. The mise en scène of Degas' extraordinarily abstract, teeny tiny etching includes, indeed depends upon, an ideological and formal linkage between a female nightclub performer and up-to-date lighting technologies and light fixtures. Degas shows a familiarity with the much commented upon intensity of the lights installed in the most popular clubs, café-concert, of the 1870s, the eye-numbing dazzle of the light, but also the abstract design possibilities presented by the pure white circles of the club's moon eggs, to borrow the term used by Guy de Maupassant. They obviously engaged Degas. The consequent honing of the visual rhyme he fashioned between glass light globes and a female entertainer's head, each a sign of modish brashness, which are positioned to reflect, echo, and play off one another, is the main visual event in that minuscule etching. But yes, I realize that Degas' operation is is indeed very, very subtle compared to what I'm noting in the Lautrec. Here it is, and it's time for me to try to sum up. Let's sum up with this poster again before us. An anarchist like Lautrec's contemporary Paul Signac saw the poster as a graphic display of the pleasure enjoyed by a society in decay. Its wide distribution and creation overnight of the fame of the artist also certainly fed into the growing affiche-omania, poster-mania of the early 1890s and placed a commercial intervention squarely in the sphere of the fine arts and vice versa, as I've already suggested. His invention of the visual culture of wicked Paris was also a powerful blow struck for the shift of subcultural practices and appearances into the visual cultural mainstream. This takes us straight back, does it not, to the analogy I proposed between Lautrec's work in the 1880s and 1890s and Takashi Murakami's work today. The link is forged by Lautrec having been an early practitioner of a business model of art exemplified today by Murakami's practice, I'm showing you here this superimposition that I engineered, a view into the galleries of his retrospective exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles in 07-08, which I've put on top of his primary Murakami Louis Vuitton logo, which you can see combines elements of the standard Vuitton logo with the eyeballs of Mr. Wink. Is there a person in this room who's not familiar with the eyeballs of Murakami's Mr. Wink? Well, that unfamiliarity is ended as of today. Anyway, to be more precise, and I mean this quite seriously, Murakami's work exemplifies a later development along the same arc initially traced by Lautrec's work. It's another recent Murakami installation, again featuring my own personal favorite, Mr. Wink. In this case, Mr. Wink is upside down. As Murakami explains on his website, quote, "When I consider what Japanese culture is like, the answer is that it's all subculture. Therefore, art is unnecessary," end quote. He sees his work, then, as indistinguishable from the artifacts or products of entertainment, mass, and commercial culture. I would not want to put Lautrec's production in that kind of cheeky and cynical end of art category, but I think that part of the modernity of Lautrec's art is its edgy and complex love affair with the society of the debased and of the commercial. The end. Thank you very much.